Hey y'all, Otter here. I have a homebrew showcase I'd love to share with everybody. Posted a comment about this on Reddit, and it seemed that there was a handful of people that were interested in this build. So I figured let's do a little showcase, talk a little bit about it in the POB, and get into it. So this here is a Facebreaker Earthshatter Banner Champion, or as I like to call him, John BANNERSLAMMERMAN. So I've got a couple things that we'll do here just to showcase the build. I'm going to run through some tier 16 essence, nothing too crazy. I'm trying to get the nameless seer from Basilica, so we'll just dive in and do this Basilica real quick. And then after this, we'll do a little Searing Exarch just to get a sense for how much damage this thing actually does. So the build is pretty strong. I league started it and just been home brewing and improving it ever since. Originally started off using a two-handed axe and kind of building it like a fairly normal slam build until I saw the Facebreaker Merc tech that has been going around this league. If you're not familiar, there is this pretty awesome interaction where you use Rallying Cry on your Merc and Facebreakers. And basically, the Merc gives you a whole ton, a whole shitload of added physical damage, which scales incredibly well with the Facebreaker, because one of the downsides for Facebreakers is that it doesn't have a base weapon damage to work with. So, in combination with those two things, you end up having a whole lot of damage fairly easily for cheap as well. Granted, you need to scale it through plenty of different methods in order to really start seeing the damage come through. It's not like you can just throw on Rallying Cry and throw on Facebreakers and then boom, you've instantly got DPS. It requires a little bit more than that, especially for endgame. If you want to be running around in maps, one-shotting everything, like as you can see I'm doing here. Those that have done essences in tier 16, you're probably familiar with just how much HP these things have. They're pretty tanky. It normally takes a little bit of punishment for them to actually die. And here I am, just one-shotting, two-shotting them, no problem. There's a few map modifiers that we're not a super big fan of with this build. I'm sure there's interesting ways to go around those limitations, but you know, generally going to be running around one-shotting stuff. Got a ton of EHP. Most things just simply cannot kill me, nor can they survive. And my AoE size is also pretty gigantic. And I bet you there's probably an interesting way to go about this same build concept using something like a chieftain. Personally, I just league started as champion, so I kind of just stuck with it. Ironically, this is the exact Merc that I'm using, except this guy is not as good, so never mind. Anyway, yeah, it looks like we got the map done, so why don't we collect our loot, move on, go do some Searing Exarch. So one of the biggest flaws of this build is that it is heavily reliant upon the banners. Having the banners not available, or if you forget to keep them up, can be quite punishing. Pretty much the only times I ever die on this character at this point is if I forgot to use my banner, and now my elemental resistances are, tanked to shit. So, all right, we're loading up an Uber Exarch here. I'm hoping to showcase the damage. I honestly don't know the boss fights that well. Not really much of a bosser myself, but, this tends to be a decent showcase for the actual damage potential. I guess there's some skill he'll use that will prevent him from, phasing or whatever, so we're going to try to do that. Gonna wait till he starts using that shit. All right, come on, buddy. Use something. Come on. Use your special skills. You can do it. You are killing me, bro. Not literally, but like metaphorically. Okay, whatever. Okay, boom. So, I basically killed him in, what was that? A second? Once I actually started attacking him? Second and a half, two? I don't know. Either way, it's absolutely disgusting amounts of damage, as you can clearly see here. It's a whole lot of fun to play. The budget isn't too crazy for this level of power, albeit, the floor is very low. I league started it, and the ceiling is also incredibly high. There's more and more ways to scale the character beyond what I'm going to show in the POB. There's many different vectors that you can go, and I'm excited for people to build variations of this build, especially perhaps ones that don't rely on crit. That would be really cool to see. So enough for the showcase. We'll move on to the POB. I'm always a little bit awkward when it comes to recordings versus like doing things live. Don't know why. It's just weird to talk to a computer without an audience. But in any event, I'll try my best to go through the tree here and kind of explain what's happening. Then we'll move on to the skills, and then we'll move on to the items. So, first and foremost, this is basically the finished version of it. There's probably some more tweaks I'm going to do to it still, because I really like quality of life when we're this deep in the endgame. So, what we've got going on here is, we've got an impossible escape giving us some max resistances. We've got an intuitive leap that is helping us save a whole boatload of points so that we can get these really valuable notables over here. If you notice, I've got these 2 points allotted here. This is really not mandatory by any stretch. I'm just doing this while I'm leveling up right now, so that I have just a little bit more elemental resistances in case I'm like kind of slacking on my banners. It helps me avoid being one-shot, so I can finally hit level 99 and then eventually hit level 100. Once I'm 100, these are going away. I am absolutely moving these somewhere else. Probably to more quality of life shit, just because I really like quality of life. You'll also notice we've got tons of Warcry cooldown recovery rate tattoos. Getting the cooldowns on the Warcries down as much as possible is amazing for keeping your banner uptime really nice and high. And on top of that, it lets us use Intimidating Cry more and more and more, so that our slams get doubled in damage by Intimidating Cry. We've got plenty of life nodes that we have our survivability pretty decently high, and there are a few nodes here that I would generally consider to be mandatory. The rest of this you can really fiddle with to your liking to make the build work. But as far as, 0 to hero goes, and what is absolutely required to make a build like this work, you're going to need this banner cluster over here. It's just too important to go without it. The Linger banner buff's amazing. It's part of what makes this build even possible. And increasing the maximum valor of the banners is what makes these banners so frickin' strong. The other thing is Versatile Combatant. That basically makes it so that one of our banners that gives us block chance will overflow into spell block chance. Again, amazing value here. And note that whenever attack damage or spell damage gets blocked, we'll gain HP, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we're in the skills section. I'm rocking a Lethal Pride here. You don't necessarily need to use a Lethal Pride. It's just what I found worked particularly well for me, so that I could include more tattoos and also bump up my damage a little bit. An alternative here would be Light of Meaning with physical damage. If you wanted to get weird, I suppose you could use a Light of Meaning with life or perhaps ES, but I would probably just stick to either physical damage or a Lethal Pride. It may look a little bit different depending on how you build your build, but this is what works well. I'm sure that there is a way to build this character in general where you're not relying on crit. I think that would actually be pretty clever, because then that's one more mod that you are not worried about, and the meta of this league tends to be trending towards builds that can ignore as many mods as humanly possible. One of the key aspects that makes this build work very well is we are scaling aura effect a ton, right? So war banners count as auras, And of course, the various auras, like your stances and whatnot, that I'll show you later, also count as auras as well. And we are anointing charisma, and we are trying to get as much reservation, area of effect, and aura effect as possible, so that we have nice big banner areas, and we're having really strong banners. And on top of that, we're allotting ourselves enough mana to have auto exertion and to leverage our various auras as well. So one key thing here is a mana mastery for recoup his mana. You can also get recoup his mana on a ring. As long as you have some sort of source of recoup his mana, this is very, very handy, as we will be using Echoes of Creation to cause ourselves self-damage. That damage then gets recouped as mana, and that helps us be a little bit more resilient to lack of recovery, right? Like if we can't regenerate life or mana, this circumvents that. Can't leech, again, that this circumvents that as well. So recoup his mana is always a fantastic thing to include whenever you are using Echoes of Creation. And we just have some more things here, like monsters cannot block our attacks. Very amazing quality of life, so that we're not just stuck on some mob that has 50% block chance and we're just swinging at it and nothing's happening. We're using clusters that give us physical damage reduction ignoring. That way, if someone has, however much physical damage reduction, or if the map has it, it just doesn't matter. We just completely ignore it. Completely. What else are we doing here? We got some cluster jewels to increase our power, right? So increased armor is always good, so we're not, accidentally killing ourselves with our Echoes of Creation. A little bit more crit is pretty great for the way that I have the build going. That way we are critting as close to 100% as possible. Doesn't need to be exactly 100%, but as close to it as possible. And again, we want to take basically all of the banner clusters are really important. The banner mastery for gaining valor when you war cry is mandatory, and the banner mastery for recovering life per valor is also mandatory, because these two things basically make it so that your war cries feed into your banner valor, and then your banner valor allows you to plant more banners, and then having an extreme amount of valor then causes those banners to basically heal you to full. And this also ignores the cannot regenerate mod. So if you find yourself losing life, just drop a frickin' banner, and then boom, you're at 100% life again. Easy peasy. Because we are playing a champion, we also want to take these fortification nodes. There's probably an argument to be made for getting these fortification nodes one way or the other, regardless if you're playing champion or not. Like I bet you there's a really interesting way to make this work for chieftain too. Granted, if I was playing chieftain, I would probably move away from banners and more towards other forms of recovery, like divine shield and whichever one it was that turns your freaking maximum life into ES. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a timeless jewel, I believe by Calm, where it turns maximum life into 15% ES or something like that. That's an amazing combination: divine shield plus Echoes of Creation plus the Calm's keystone. Anyway, a couple of other things that are pretty freaking important here. Runegraft of the Bound. Because we are using Facebreakers, Runegraft of the Bound is going to be making those Facebreakers much more effective for our build, and therefore this Runegraft alone is giving us 16% DPS, which is pretty disgusting. If you are chasing quality of life over performance, you can absolutely run without this. I just personally am not myself. That's just the direction that I've taken the build, but you are more than welcome to go without it, to be honest with you. Runegraft of the Warp here, pretty much mandatory. I find that just about every build this league should be using Runegraft of the Warp. It's just amazing. And lastly, Runegraft of Time. Runegraft of Time works with auto-exertion war cries. So this means that fairly often your war cries will double, sometimes triple, sometimes quadruple or more cast in a row. So that means that you could potentially, for example, drop a banner, and then you'll just have a bunch of war cries pop off all at once, even though you've only got, 3 war cries on auto exert. And suddenly you're looking at 70 to 80 valor from essentially just one note here. Pretty amazing quality of life. Without it, the valor generation is a bit lower. You can still manage without it. I just personally find that if I want to have all 3 banners going, and I generally do want to have all 3 banners going, Ringcraft of Time makes that a lot more possible. And again, there are some other ways you can experiment with this build. If you want to go towards this direction, pick up Constitution and whatnot, you absolutely can. If you want to go towards more jewels and be a little bit more jewel-oriented, you absolutely can. These medium cluster jewels are not actually mandatory per se, so you can recover those points there and move in a different direction. It's totally up to you. And I think I would be pretty excited to see some variations of this pop up if folks end up getting creative with that. As far as ascendancy points go, I'm currently taking Master of Metal, Fortitude, Unstoppable Hero, and Inspirational. Of those, the only one that I believe is mandatory is Inspirational. And then I am currently using Flesh and Flame to get Worthy Causes. However, you don't have to do that. You could just path to Worthy Causes, and then you don't necessarily need those nodes at all. You actually don't even necessarily need Fortitude either. I just personally find it to be a high quality of life, so I keep it myself. If you decide not to use Fortitude for whatever reason, just bear in mind that you're going to want to have a source for Fortify on hits somewhere. If you do go that route, that does mean that you can take these nodes over here, which is pretty fantastic, right? So that is an option for you to open up your build just a little bit further. That being said, I like this right here. I think it's pretty fantastic. You can absolutely do a Flesh and Flame for something like Brutal Fervor or Impact, or if you are primarily hunting bosses, maybe consider Bane of Legends. And I don't think I would necessarily consider the other options, really. You could probably use Headsman if you just, want to go fast. Alright, as far as skills go, again, because we are using banners and war cries and whatnot, some of the slots are basically going to be decided for us, right? As a slammer and war crier and so on and so forth, auto exertion is basically just demanded. Auto exertion with intimidating cry, seismic cry, and then you can either use infernal cry or rallying cry here. It's totally up to you. I personally use Infernal Cry and generally avoid Elemental Reflect maps. If I was running an Elemental Reflect map, I would just simply sub that out for Rallying Cry. Easy peasy, right? Even though we are not getting the buff effects, the exerted attacks is pretty freaking important for DPS, right? So even just one little War Cry alone, as you can see here, contributes about 18% of our damage. Infernal Cry in particular adds 23% of our damage because the exertion gives us just a little bit extra bonus damage. As far as auras go, other than the reservation done by auto exertion, we're also running Flesh and Stone, which is pretty neat optional thing that we can do here. If you're on a map that demands more DPS, just swap into Blood Stance. If you're on a map that demands more defenses, use Sand Stance. And as you can see over here, the DPS and the maximum hit pools all adjust appropriately depending on which stance you're in. So I really like that little bit of utility from Flesh and Stone, and it does scale quite nicely with this build, so I'm a pretty big fan of it. Determination is pretty much mandatory to keep our phys max hit looking nice. That way our slams don't accidentally kill us whenever we are exerting a bunch of attacks with Echoes of Creation. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we want to use Precision and Arrogance just to bring our accuracy and crit strike up a little bit further. Again, the closer we can get to 100% crit chance and not missing are pretty important to our DPS. All right, picking up where I left off. So in the shield here we have Battle Mage's Cry with Assassin's Mark and Molten Shell attached to it. Now the reason why we're doing Battle Mage's Cry outside of the auto exertion is that, first of all, it's very socket demanding. So adding auto exertion to this is honestly a pain in the ass. And second, we actually do want the buff that comes from Battle Mage's Cry to increase our chance to crit. Without it, our crit chance does take a little bit of a hit. So for those that might be unaware, whenever you add a war cry to auto exertion actually disables the buff but keeps the exertion, right? So with Battle Mage's Cry, we need both the buff and the exertion, so we're just going to keep it separate and manually cast it. It does exert 6 melee attacks with the current configuration, so it's no big deal to use it every 6 melee attacks or whatnot, because we are generally one-shotting things anyway. That means I'm generally using this, like, I don't know, maybe every half minute or something like that. We've got a good amount of Warcry speed anyway, so it takes like maybe a third of a second to cast it. So it's no big deal. Now we have a whole bunch of banners. We are attempting to use all 3 banners at some point. The priority being the block banner, which is going to be Dread. Generally, Dread banner is going to be keeping us alive. Actually, if we just go ahead and turn on EHP gain on block, we have an infinite effective health pool whenever we are standing in the block banner. And the reason for that is that we have scaled the banner effect so much that it completely heals us to full whenever we block. So in order for something to kill you while you're standing in the Dread banner, they'll have to basically one-shot you, or they'll have to get lucky enough to, you know, two-shot you or something like that through your block chance. So it doesn't happen pretty much ever whenever I'm in the Dread banner. I'm basically immortal when I'm in the Dread banner, unless I specifically get one shot, which in the state of the build as I have it now doesn't really happen much. But, you know, it's Path of Exile. The potential to be one shot is always around the corner. Defiance banner, to me, after that, is the next highest priority. Granted, you know, Defiance banner also gives you movement speed, and without the movement speed, we are a little bit slow. So generally, when I'm mapping, and in the showcase I showed you earlier, I'm swapping between Defiance banner and Dread banner like all the time. Defiance banner is going to be making us faster, and it's going to make us have 100% spell suppression. And on top of that, it also increases our spell suppression effectiveness by a pretty massive degree. It grants us minus 13 damage taken of each damage type from suppressed hits to you and allies. And again, we're scaling aura effect, so it's much, much higher than 13. It's probably in the hundreds, if not thousands, of damage taken reduction. And then last, War Banner. This gives us the little bit more accuracy that we need to ensure that we are nailing the hits. It doesn't necessarily need to be cast at 100% Valor. You can probably cast it for lower and still get amazing benefit out of it. But for whatever reason you're just cycling between these two banners, we still have amazing performance, right? Still in the 100 million DPS range, still have amazing crit. Our hit chances, you know, perfectly fine against normal mobs, because right now I have the POB set up for Guardian Pinnacle. Yeah, we're still at 90% hit chance. And with Earthshatter, which sends out, you know, 6 spikes, the chances of you missing with all 6 spikes is pretty much none. You will pretty much hit the target every single time, regardless of whether War Banner is up or not. But I like to drop War Banner when I know something just needs a little bit more oomph to get it killed. Okay, and then for the 6th link, because notably this will be the only 6th link that we can do with our setup in this build, it's going to be Earthshatter, right? You can configure this a little bit differently. Of note, you can swap out Fist of War or Pulverize. I personally just like to use this setup because I just want to slam the ground once and kill everything on my screen and then move on. So we're going to take Earthshatter, Overexertion, Awaken Melee Physical Damage, Pulverize, Fist of War, and Impale. Ideally, we would actually swap out Impale for Brutality, but little issue here is that I'm using a 7 Teachings in this build, and getting 6 red sockets on a 7 Teachings is insanely difficult. At some point, I'm going to do it, but it's estimated to cost about 7 divines of tainted chromatic orbs to hit 6 red on a corrupted 7 teachings. And for the non-corrupted 7 teachings, it's even worse because it is an evasion and energy shield base. So Impale is just really there to make it less difficult to have a 6 link going. If you end up getting, let's say, for example, 5 red and 1 blue, you can actually go with either Conk Effect or increased critical damage instead, and both will work just fine. So you don't necessarily need to have 5 red, 1 green. You can do 5 red, 1 green, 5 red, 1 blue, or ideally 6 red. But with the configuration that I have now, Impale is perfectly fine. I'm using the Impale ascendancy point anyway, so no big deal. In the POB, I also have Pride and Vulnerability. These are actually coming from the Merc. I don't have the Merc in the POB quite yet. I'll show you the Merc gear on the live game in just a moment here. But these are also a massive vector through which we are scaling our DPS. Okay, onto the items. So, you can 0 to hero this character, so you don't necessarily need to have this exact setup of items, but this is what I have set for the in-game variation at this time. So starting with the shield, we've got a shield that helps us get crit immunity. So reducing extra damage from crits is pretty important for surviving those one-shots. We're getting all maximum resistances. That way we can get as close to 90% as possible for our elemental and chaos resistances. We've got additional PDR. The more phys max hit we can have, the better. And then we've got maximum life. And a little known fact about Crusader shields is that when you use a Crusader Exalted Orb on a shield, you are guaranteed to get 1% increased damage per 1 chance to block attack damage if only prefixes are available. So the way that you would craft this item is suffixes first, and then once the suffixes are done, you'll want to get maximum life onto the item, which personally I recommend using the Exalted Orb route for this, where you essentially block a mod, Exalted Orb, and if you miss, you Beastcraft, suffixes can't be changed, scour the item, and then you do that essentially over and over and over again until you get the tier 1 maximum life. You'll need 1 extra prefix slot available, and then you can craft on the 6 modifier, right? After you hit it with the Crusader Exalted Orb. For the helmet, we are using Echoes of Creation. This is extremely important for this build. I did also try doing a POB configuration with the infamous Warcry crit mod on it instead. And to be honest with you, I just really could not get that mod to work very well in just about any configuration involving Facebreaker. I personally just found that for Facebreaker, Echoes of Creation worked better. I think that if you weren't using Facebreaker, the Warcry Exertion crit stat from Infamy would work out pretty great. But for the way that we have it set up with the Facebreaker, you're going to want to use Echoes of Creation. A quick note here, there are a couple of uniques where I've added on a bunch of crap to the item. That's just to reflect what is on our Merc. That way the POB is a little bit more accurate with Merc buffs. So in this example, our Merc is going to be reducing the enemy regeneration rate, and it's also going to have increased vulnerability curse effect. Now, I am personally using a maximum power charges corrupted Royal Bergenet Echoes. You don't necessarily need to do that yourself. There are other corruptions that will work just fine. I just personally chose to use that one because I found one for a good deal, and it helped me get closer to crit cap. And I am getting power charges through Assassin's Mark anyway. 7 Teachings is pretty much cornerstone to this build as well, at least for the crit variation of it. It can have massive ranges for the rolls, so you do want to find one that has good critical strike chance, good critical strike multiplier, and then the rest of the mods are nice to haves. You don't necessarily need to have increased evasion and energy shield to a high degree, I just personally found one that had the stats that I wanted, so I shelled out a little bit extra currency to get this one. You can survive just fine with lower rolls on just about any other mod. Like, for example, you don't even necessarily need the more attack speed mod. We are a slam build, so attack speed is just kind of a quality of life thing. It's no big deal if the more attack speed mod is on the lower end, like I've done it in my configuration here. Of note here, the corruption +2 to level of socketed AoE gems actually does add quite a bit of damage to earthshatter. In addition, the 7 teachings being corrupted is hugely important for getting at least 5 red sockets. Because without the corruption, it's much, much, much more difficult to hit at least 5 red sockets. With tainted chromatic orbs, the chances are dramatically easier to get at least 5 red. Okay, of course, Facebreaker is kind of like the hallmark point of this whole build. They improved Facebreakers this league, so I figured, why not? Let's try something involving Facebreaker. Mine is the double corrupted to have AoE and aura gem effect on it, so my banners are what are shoved in it. That way my banners are even more effective. Having +4 levels on your banners is what gives them an extra breakpoint and more banner effect. Otherwise, if you have different Facebreakers, so like a very common one would be Facebreakers with attack crit or Facebreakers with curse on vulnerability on hit. You absolutely could socket something else into the Facebreaker, and that is another route to bring your crit chance a little bit higher. Yeah, it's totally up to you. This is not a mandatory corruption by any means, but I definitely would at the very least get a Facebreaker pushing 900% plus more physical damage. The closer you can get to 1,000 the better, but do note that because it has such a massive range, that getting 1,000% itself is pretty much a Herculean task, especially one with good corruptions on it. 1,000% plus good corruptions would probably be worth like hundreds of divines, if not mirror, some shit like that. I don't want to invest mirrors in this character, at least not at the moment. I just feel like that would be kind of excessive because it's already quite strong with the level of investment that I've got in it. For boots, I am attempting to shore up my chaos resistance with it. My chaos resistance is looking a little bit weak in this current configuration because we're relying on so many uniques. So you got to get chaos res somewhere. Boots are a pretty decent place to get it. The implicits for boots aren't particularly strong for this build, so again, just another source of chaos res. Attacks exerted by seismic cry dealing X% increased damage does add a little bit more damage to our build, but note that for whatever reason POB doesn't recognize this mod at all. So whatever DPS number you see here, you can comfortably increase it because the mod just doesn't do anything in POB for some reason. So pretty standard craft here. Trying to shore up our attributes weak point. Of note, my intelligence is quite low. This is not the brightest champion on the block, so getting some boots that makes him smarter is very helpful for scaling the assassin's mark. And I'm sure there's variations where you'll want even more intelligence, and you should consider getting more intelligence, especially if you end up going with a blue socket instead of a green socket on your 7 teachings. You should probably get more intel on either your cluster jewels or on your rings, which I'm planning to do myself, and I'll show you in just a second. My rings don't necessarily have the best stats on them, but they're fine enough. Another hallmark part of the build here, Rigwald's Curse Wereclaw Talisman, pretty frickin' important. This is what's giving us extra crit strike chance. It's giving us crit strike multi. It's making claw attack stuff apply to our unarmed attacks, which, I mean, honestly, I don't give a shit about because I'm not doing anything with claw stuff at all. But it is an option for you, and that is another vector to take the build, is anything involving claw modifiers, so long as it fits the parameters here on Rigwald's. I don't personally care. And again, we've got a couple of mods that are coming from the Merc here. Your damage with hits is lucky, and you can apply an additional curse. These are coming from the chest piece and the amulet of the Merc, which gives us a pretty nice bump in damage. This is what enables us to use both Assassin's Mark and Vulnerability. In addition, the Lucky modifier has a tendency to increase DPS by about 15 to 16% for just about every build under the sun. For rings, I am currently using 2 steel rings that were fractured and then crafted using Contempt essences. My main goal here really was just to bump up my chaos resistance and to shore up some weaknesses in attributes. When I crafted these, I had a shortage of dexterity. I no longer have that shortage, so this second one that has dexterity on it isn't really necessary. You could totally do a Calandra's Touch here if you want, and just mirror the other ring. That being said, I do plan on some point crafting a ring that has intelligence on it instead, and I think I'll probably end up moving away from steel ring, and we'll end up crafting on a vermilion ring instead, because that tiny bit of flat damage that we're getting from the implicit on steel ring at this point in the build's life isn't as important. But the earlier you are in this build's life cycle, the more flat damage like steel rings is really important to scaling your DPS. Eventually you'll want more things like crit multi, increased attack damage, that kind of thing, especially if you are using a Rallying Cry Merc, which is pretty much mandatory tech for this league for Facebreakers. In this version of the build, I am using a Mage Blood. Again, some Merc stuff that I've got here. My Merc has Pride, and I'm also scaling that Pride effect using implicits, and I'm also scaling it using a String of Servitude, so that my Pride is quite strong on the Merc. So as long as my Merc is hanging around, we're dealing tons of physical damage. And of course, Mage Blood is just, an all-around good item, enabling our Flask shenanigans so that we can get crit, curse immunity, shock immunity, which we can then combine with a Storm Shroud to be immune to all elemental elements, and of course stun immunity as well, which is nice to have. You don't necessarily need to have stun immunity. You can absolutely take Unwavering Stance. And then also, if you're not using a Lethal Pride, this is the one that turns evasion into armor. That's a fantastic pick as well. I just personally wanted to get those 2 passive points back and put them into other things. So that's why I decided to go for stun immunity here. Now I'm using a Progenesis to increase my maximum life as well and shore up my chaos resistance weakness. And generally, relying on something like a Progenesis to fix your chaos resistance isn't the best idea, but the way that I get around this being an issue is with my Watcher's Eye. So my Watcher's Eye is granting increased attack damage while using a precision, which we are. It helps us shore up that additional crit damage reduction from Determination, combined with our shield that gives us total crit damage immunity. And then the important thing that's making my Progenesis work is we are gaining a flask charge whenever we deal a critical strike while affected by precision. So essentially my Progenesis has just about 100% uptime. It's always running, so it's keeping me alive. And it's a pretty solid addition to the build. You can absolutely run with something else here instead. You could run the Bottle of Faith, you could run the Lion's Roar, or whatever suits your fancy. I personally think that the Progenesis is the best pick here, but there are some variations. As far as cluster jewels go, again, we're doing the PDR reduction. We are attempting to gain some armor through a Warcry cluster here, and again I'm also getting a little bit more intelligence through my clusters, and then we are using things like Intuitive Leap, Storm Shroud, Impossible Escape, Lethal Pride, and then for Flesh and Flame, this is what I'm using to get that Worthy Causes, but you can take that in a different direction. Okay, as far as Merc goes, let's get back to the game here. I want to go back to town so I don't just randomly die or some shit. Okay, So, the Merc is what is giving us such a large boost to our damage. Um, the thing is that we have plenty of damage without the Merc being alive, but the Merc being alive and giving us damage through Rallying Cry increases our damage by like 3 times or 4 times as much or something like that. Um, it's kind of insane. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Rallying Cry with something like duration on it or cooldown reduction on it basically allows the Merc to give us 100% uptime on a buff that gives us added physical damage or added weapon damage based off of their weapon. So we want the Merc to have a two-handed weapon that has as much damage as possible, especially physical damage, so that it is scaling off of the Facebreakers better. So I personally found this axe for pretty cheap on the market. The DPS doesn't actually matter; it's more so the actual damage on the weapon. So you know, a lot of these items are probably higher in DPS but lower in damage. That is not a good pick. You definitely want something that's got really high physical damage. I believe that there is a unique axe that's actually super well suited for this. Let me see if I happen to have it. I hope I do. Nope, I don't have it. Okay, anyway, well, there is a unique axe that you can use in place of this. There we go. It's I believe it's Ulantal's Kiss. If it's not that one, it's Ulantal's Embrace, whatever. You can search on the trade for that, and it will have an extremely high amount of physical damage for something that is relatively cheap. It's a perfectly fine fit for the Merc because we don't actually care about the Merc's DPS itself. The Merc is just using something with a ton of physical damage to buff us. So this guy is just here to support us. We've got the helmet with the Warcry buff effects that we are scaling that Rallying Cry. In addition, we've got some nice little quality of life things to help try to keep him alive, like life regeneration rate. We've got some implicits here that increases his effectiveness. We're using Perkle's Toe to increase our DPS a little bit with lucky hits. This isn't mandatory by any stretch. You can actually use something else. If you feel like spending extra currency and you want to keep your Merc alive, because again, your Merc is adding a ton of DPS, and if he does die, you're going to lose a ton of damage. You can consider something using like a Defiance of Destiny instead. I personally find that my Merc only really dies in specific situations, like extremely rippy tier 17 maps, or, you know, that stupid ass boss at the end of Sanctuary. She has a tendency to kill the Merc as well. Otherwise, my Merc stays alive like 99% of the time, so I don't really feel the need to use something like Defiance of Destiny. But if I was running content, I would probably just swap that out real quick for Defiance of Destiny. I'm using Call of the Void so that the Merc also decreases how much damage enemies are doing through the chill effect. You know, there's probably a better pick here, but, you know, I didn't want to overthink it. It seems to work just fine. Whatever. I like chilling stuff. For the ring, we have a Curse Enemies with Vulnerability on Hit. Now, the other mod that was kind of nice to have here was Gain 2 life per enemy hit with attacks. Honestly, if I was like building something even stronger for this guy, I would use Curse Enemies with Vulnerability on Hit, and then I would also use the Elder mod that increases how much life per enemy hit with attacks. That way he's just keeping himself alive even better. The way that we make the enemies being cursed on hit possible is with an Apply Additional Curse mod. Now you can get Apply Additional Curse on either the chest or the necklace. It's more expensive to get it on the necklace, so I chose to go with the chest. But I'm sure at some point, you know, I'll get the itch to go ahead and, you know, put it on the frickin' necklace. A pretty common pick here as well is the Gruthkohl's Pelt to give your Merc a ton of life regeneration. The only problem for me is that my Merc is using Sweep, and Sweep is a spell which gets disabled by Gruthkohl's Pelt, evidently. So if your Merc is using Sweep, it is not going to do anything while it has a Pelt on. It will literally just stand there. You know, so if you're lucky enough to get one that has Pride and Rallying Cry and not Sweep, you could probably use Gruthkohl's Pelt. But if you get sweep, if you get unlucky like I did, you know, no growth spell allowed. Sad. Now, the implicits here are important to mention because of two things. First, again, Warcry buff effect makes Rallying Cry even stronger. Second, we have Pride increased aura effect, and if you're not aware, when the Merc is in our presence, we are considered a pinnacle boss, we are considered a unique enemy, and we're also considered an ally. So the Merc will benefit from just about any mod that is placed here, regardless of requirement. Ideally, I would actually have the pinnacle form of Pride instead, but again, I didn't want to spend, you know, tons of currency to make this character possible. For the boots, we are going for Rallying Cry buff effect. I didn't even bother building anything else. I'm sure there's something good here, but I don't give a shit. String of Servitude, we are going for a Pride increased aura effect. That way our Pride is disgustingly strong whenever our Merc is around. And if you're not aware, I've heard that Mercs are using a much higher level of skills than players are. So correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I've heard that level 83 Mercs are using level 26 auras, and level 84 Mercs are using level 27 skills and auras. So there's that. Now the last thing to mention here is the Breath Stealer Hydroscale Gauntlets. I am using this one simply for the Anoint benefit, which is the increased Warcry duration and the increased Warcry buff effect. This essentially makes it so that my Merc has, again, higher uptime on Rallying Cry with me, and it makes a Rallying Cry stronger. And according to that, we are also using an Anoint on the Amulet that does essentially the same thing, right? Increasing the Warcry buff effect and making enemies take more damage whenever he does perform his Warcry. Some more variations you can do here. You can actually use the, Strangle Gasp? You can use a Strangle Gasp to anoint more Warcry-based anointments, which will open up the glove slot for other Merc shenanigans. There's tons that are flying around out there this league, so, you know, if that's a direction you want to take and you want to invest more in the build than I did, then you can absolutely go that route. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers anything. You know, I'm still experimenting with the build a little bit. I'm enjoying playing it. I've been intending on swapping to something else, and I just keep adding more to this guy instead. So, you know, maybe I'll homebrew and play something else this league, but yeah, that's the Facebreaker champion, or as I like to call him, John BANNERSLAMMERMAN. If you have any questions, let me know. That's it. Thanks, y'all. This was Otter.